I'm a guy who has a great passion for dolls, and this is a scary story about a spooky doll that I used to have. I bought this doll from a thrift shop located in Japan. It took me over a month for it to be delivered here. Having finished the payment, I brought the package inside. The doll was quite big and bulky. It took me a lot of effort to finally drag it into the house. Feeling excited, I took a paper knife and carefully opened the package. Needless to say, I was really nervous as I had waited a long time for this one. It was a clown doll. Its size was as big as that of an adult. The lines were immensely detailed, which made the doll become so lively. I slowly removed the nylon layer. My first impression with the toy was that it was very well packaged. I was very satisfied with the doll as it gave me an eerie vibe when I looked at it. I didn't expect that it would be as tall as I was. During that time, I had been hearing a lot about Japanese sex dolls, which were made up very realistically to look like a human. So there was a high chance that mine was also made out of those materials. As I was leading a single life at that time, I considered the doll a friend of mine. I even slept with it, talked to it every time I felt bored. It was great to have someone that only listened to you without making any judgment. However, one night as I was sleeping, I suddenly had a feeling that someone was watching me as I could feel them breathing near my face. I opened my eyes and looked around as my gaze stopped at the doll. I was startled. I remember having the doll laying on its back, but now it was laying on the side, staring at me. What was even more bizarre was that during those days, every time I got up, I always felt tired and dehydrated. But that didn't bother me much, as I believed it was the excessive work that caused me to feel that way. Later, when I had a girlfriend, I asked her to come over to my house. Even though I had told her about my hobby of collecting dolls, the clown doll made her feel a bit worried the first time she saw it. The doll wasn't supposed to look adorable. In fact, it looked a bit scary, so I could understand why she was afraid. I quickly reassured her, then told her to wait while I get her something to drink. It was obvious that my girlfriend found it uncomfortable to sit next to the clown doll alone, considering the fact that it had the size of an adult and a scary face. I poured the drink as fast as I could so I could get back to her. All of a sudden, I heard a fierce scream coming out of the living room. I quickly ran to check and was terrified to see the scene appearing before my eyes. The clown doll was laying on top of my girlfriend. She fearfully looked at me, begging for help. I hurriedly pulled the doll out of my girlfriend and told her not to try lifting as it was really heavy. But she explained to me that she didn't have any intention of lifting it up. It was the doll that came at her. I reassured her again, saying perhaps the scary look of the doll had terrified her and made her hallucinate. Her face was full of sheer terror. She instantly told me to put the doll into my wardrobe. Since I didn't want to upset her, I put on a smile and did what I was told at once. You stay here. It's gonna be my first time, so don't hate me for leaving you in this wardrobe. That night, I finally succeeded in convincing my girlfriend to stay the night with me. The perfect moment had come. Since it was the first time for both of us, we instantly blushed as we looked at each other. My girlfriend gave me an affectionate hug and then a French kiss. As we were making out passionately, we breathed shallowly as if we were having asthma. As we were so caught up in our own business, all of a sudden she bit my tongue and screamed loudly, then buried her face into my chest, trembling uncontrollably. I asked her what had happened. She speechlessly pointed at the wardrobe doors. As I gazed at the wardrobe, I was astounded to find out that the door had been open. I could feel my skin crawl as I looked at the doll's face slowly appearing in the dark. Its facial expression made it look so demonically. I went to the wardrobe, neatly placed the doll, then closed the doors firmly. I comforted my girlfriend afterwards and apologized for the doors being badly closed. But she was still scared, as she had a premonition the doll was watching them, and it wasn't as inanimate as it might seem. I put on a smile as I listened to her and told her that she was just overthinking, as the doll had been with me for over a month, yet nothing abnormally happened. However, she went on by telling me about the horror stories of ghosts living inside dolls in Japan, which made me feel slightly scared. I then promised that I would sell the doll if it could make her feel any better. The next morning I put the doll inside the original package, whilst not forgetting to make an apology. "I'm so sorry for this, but I have to get married anyway. I'll get you a new owner." Then wrapped the doll with a plastic bag and sealed the package. Despite having a bit of regret, I believed selling the doll away was the best thing I could do under the circumstances. Later I went out to buy something for breakfast. As I was on my way, I suddenly realized that I had forgotten my wallet, hence returning home. When I went to the door, I heard someone screaming fiercely. Without hesitation, I pushed the door at once. The terrifying scene appeared before my eyes, made my heart drop to my stomach. The clown doll I previously placed in the storage room was on top of my girlfriend with a sharp knife in his hand. I rushed to her and pushed the doll away. It laid unmoving on the ground. How terrifying. The doll had left 2 deep cuts on my girlfriend's hand with the knife it was holding. My girlfriend told me it wasn't a normal doll. As I bandaged the cuts for her, I asked her what had happened. My girlfriend told me that while she was in her sleep, she heard footsteps outside the door. The door slowly opened to her amazement. Her eyes wide in terror. She panicked as she saw the thing in front of her. The spooky clown was standing by the doll, demonically laughing at her. Unexpectedly, the doll pulled out a knife. Its eyes turned bloodshot as it put on a sinister smile that revealed all the sharp teeth, and laughed hysterically. The doll raised the knife as it got inside the house and approached her. In just a blink of an eye, the doll growled and jumped at her. My girlfriend was extremely terrified. She reflexively defended the attack with her hands, then got off the bed and rushed to the door. She threw the pillows at the clown doll in order to slow it down. The doll cuts the pillows in half with a sharp knife in its hand, causing the feathers to fall out. My girlfriend was caught by the doll as she made it to the door. Luckily, I was there in time to save her. As I checked around the room, there was indeed blood on the mattress, while the pillows had already been cut in half. Not allowing this to happen again, I brought the doll to a friend of mine, asking him to sell it for me. He told me that it would take him a while to get an owner for the doll, since people were more interested in buying sex dolls rather than scary looking ones. I then told him about the horrific incident and advised him to sell it as soon as possible. But the man thought I was joking, as he found it hard to believe in such a story like that. He even said that my girlfriend had made it up in order to get rid of the doll. However, when I told him about the cuts on my girlfriend's hand, he gradually believed me, as he had also been told about the horror stories of haunted dolls before. The doll must have been jealous of my girlfriend, as she had replaced it and made it become less important to me. Before I left, I once again told my friend to be careful with the doll and contacted me immediately if any problem arose. The clown doll might have developed a bond with me, and there was likely some scary spirit being trapped inside of it. Since that day, I still hadn't gotten any information about the doll. However, I always had a feeling of being watched by someone.
This story is about a woman named Yi. After a divorce, she gained custody of her daughter whose name was Nana. To start a new life, Yi moved into an old apartment building. For them, this was a new beginning, a new turning point in life. The new house was very warm inside, but still good enough. Nana seemed to be quite interested in this place as well. Yi thought that Nana would gradually get used to a new life here. While Yi was rearranging the furniture in the room, Nana surprisingly bought a doll for Yi to see. Nana found the doll under the bed in the bedroom. Yi thought that the previous owner had intentionally left the doll there, so she did not object to her daughter wanting to keep it. Nana was overjoyed because now she had a friend to play with. Because on Mondays Nana had to go to school, Yi had to coax her to go to bed early. Yi waited for her daughter to fall asleep before returning to her room and continuing to tidy up. Because Yi was afraid that her daughter would have trouble sleeping in a strange place, sometimes she silently went to her daughter's room to see if she was okay. Yi looked at her young daughter lovingly and then covered her daughter with a blanket. While covering her with the blanket, Yi coincidentally glanced at the doll beside Nana. When Yi looked down again, she saw the doll with wide eyes and a wide mouth staring at her, looking downright scary. Yi immediately picked up the doll to check it out and placed it in a corner. Now, she discovered the doll would close its eyes when it was sitting up and open its eyes when it was lying down. The following day, when breakfast was ready, Yi called her daughter to the table. As soon as she walked to the door of Nana's room, Yi overheard two people talking to each other. Listening for a while, Yi clearly knew that one was her child Nana, but she didn't know who the other one was. There were only two of them in the house, which made Yi feel nervous. Yi quickly opened the door to the room but only saw her daughter talking to the doll. Seeing Yi, Nana eagerly introduced her new friend and told Yi that the doll could talk to anyone. Yi didn't know why her daughter said that. She didn't believe the doll could speak, so she assumed her daughter had misheard or imagined this. When Yi thought about it, she suddenly saw the doll staring at her. Yi thought that she might have been under a lot of stress lately, so she quickly left the room to avoid affecting her daughter negatively. When it came to meals, her daughter even brought the doll with her and fed the doll as if taking care of a baby. After breakfast, Yi drove Nana to school and then returned back home. While busy arranging things, Yi suddenly heard the call, "Mom?" coming from Nana's bedroom. Yi was very confused when she heard someone call her because her daughter went to school and she was alone at home. Yi immediately opened the door to her daughter's room to see what was going on. When she looked into the room, Yi didn't see anyone else aside from the doll sitting on her daughter's bed. At this point, she still didn't believe the doll could talk. However, no matter how she looked at it, she still found this doll to be very out of the ordinary. Yi looked at the doll for a moment. The more she looked at the doll, the more strange and fearful she felt. It was a mother's premonition that made her feel insecure about the doll. When Yi went downstairs to buy some things, she conveniently threw the doll in a nearby trash can. Later, with Nana home, when she was calling her daughter out to eat dinner, Yi suddenly saw Nana sitting on the bed crying. Her daughter constantly and repeatedly were asking why Yi had abandoned her. Yi thought that maybe the daughter was missing her father, so she decided to approach and comfort Nana. At this moment, the little girl suddenly turned her head while shouting and blaming Yi for abandoning her. Nana's strange and angry expression made Yi feel terrified. Then, when he was about to comfort her daughter, Nana stood up from the bed and repeated her words. At this time, a scary thing happened. Yi suddenly discovered that Nana was almost floating above the bed, her feet not touching the bed. Although her daughter's expression scared Yi, she still managed to ask what had happened. Before she could get close to Nana, her daughter once again screamed loudly. Her appearance this time was very frightening. Her eyes were big, her face full of indignation. Nana's screams were so loud that Yi couldn't bear it without covering her ears. It was even more terrifying to witness a photo of them in a glass frame shatter from the sound. After Nana's screaming stopped, she collapsed on the bed before fainting. Yi appeared bewildered, immediately picking up her daughter while trying to wake her up. After a while, seeing that her daughter was awake, Yi did not dare to stay at home anymore and immediately took Nana to her parents' house. After listening to the strange things that had happened, Yi's parents immediately advised her to find an exorcist to solve it because they thought that the house might have been a haunted case. After all the strange things, Yi also felt the apartment was the problem. In order not to be disturbed by demons, Yi immediately followed her parents' advice and found an exorcist named Chu to help. Looking through the house, the exorcist could see that it had been vacant for a long time. As Yi heard this news from him, she immediately believed the cause because she was renting this house for a low price. If it weren't for it being close to her daughter's school, she wouldn't have rented it anyway. Mr. Chu said, "This house is haunted. I can help you to solve this problem." Yi suddenly remembered the details of the doll and told the exorcist about it. However, he explained that the doll was just a vessel for the spirit or demon to live in. It was okay to throw it away, but the entity was still remaining within the house. Mr. Chu immediately showed Yi a solution about how to use firecrackers in every corner of the house. The loud explosion of firecrackers would alarm the children's soul and would drive the ghosts out of their house. Then, she should hang an extra Beigu mirror on the doorframe to prevent ghosts and demons from entering. With no other choice, Yi immediately did everything that Mr. Chu told her to do. All of the mentioned methods worked surprisingly well. Nana finally returned to normal and stopped behaving strange, without even mentioning the doll anymore. The mother and daughter were able to go back to a normal life as before. Yi clearly felt the change in her daughter. Nana was much happier and even ate more food than before. Her happiest thought was seeing her daughter live safely. However, a scary truth still prevailed. After every meal, Nana would stealthily place food under the table. It seemed that this entity did not disappear. It was able to exist in the house without needing to be in the doll anymore. Nana happily told her mother that she had a new friend and she was no longer sad. The mother and daughter were not at all aware that for them, the real nightmare had just started. In 2017, 1 month after graduating from university, I found a job in the right industry in an industrial park. To facilitate work and save money, I chose to rent a place not far from the company. The host took me to see the room. At that time, this apartment was occupied by 4 people, and I was the 5th. Although crowded, it still ensured enough comfortable living space. One advantage of renting a single room in an apartment was that I only paid a small amount for the room I lived in, but enjoyed ample communal space. The first person I met was Chan. He worked as a security guard in a shopping mall. After the landlord handed over the room, I started to get to know my housemates. Chan was a friendly and cheerful person, so we quickly became friends. Then I asked Chan about the rest. I should say hello to them as well. However, Chan told me not to pay attention to them because they were not very friendly. Then, after a few greetings, I also went into my room. When I stayed for a week, the second person I saw was Kalim. He lived with his girlfriend and was not very friendly with people around. The third person in the house was Ten, a young man 3 years older than me. He was rather aggressive looking guy, so I didn't dare to interact much. My room was in the middle. On the left was Chan's room. On the right was Kalim's room. A thin wall separated the rooms, so the sound insulation was poor. So every night I could hear Kalim's loud voice. Every time I couldn't stand it, I hit the wall with my hand to let him know. It was not until late at night that his voice ceased. One time I couldn't sleep. I went to the balcony to smoke and talk with Chan about Kalim's problem. Because Kalim lived with his girlfriend, it was understandable that Kalim was a little noisy. Talking about this, Chan expressed jealousy because Kalim was a lousy person, poor, but had a girlfriend. Despite living in the same house, the strange thing was, but more than half a month had passed, Chan had never seen Kalim's girlfriend. I feel a bit bored because my housemates lived unfriendly with each other. Every day I used to face him whenever I left the room to go to work, but strangely, I never saw his girlfriend at all. However, one time by chance, I saw his girlfriend for the first time. Strictly speaking, I could only see her back through the gap in the door. Discovered by Kalim, he suddenly slammed the door with a furious expression, and he looked at me with a fierce look as if he wanted to eat me alive. His look made me feel a little embarrassed. I immediately avoided his gaze and hurried out the door. That night, something terrible happened to me. I was lying on the phone playing when I suddenly heard Ten shouting in the living room. It seemed that there was a terrible smell outside that made him so angry. I opened the door to the room a little to see what was going on. Ten was still annoyed by the strange foul smell outside. Later, Chan also went out to meet him and asked what was wrong. Ten said that he couldn't stand the stench any longer. Chan also smelled his stench from yesterday, but he thought that maybe someone was repairing the sewers, so the whole building smelled like that. That night, because I felt the need to urinate, I got up to go to the bathroom. I intended not to turn on the lights to avoid disturbing others. Unexpectedly, I saw a girl standing motionless in the toilet. I guessed it was probably Kalim's girlfriend. When I saw the toilet was occupied, I intended to go to my room first and return later. But when I took a few steps, I felt something was wrong. I wondered why she didn't turn on the bathroom light. After that, I heard the sound of water dripping in there. I was curious to see what the girl looked like. The girl was standing in front of the mirror, looking downright strange. My eyes followed the girl's body until I saw a lot of blood flowing in large puddles when I looked down at her feet. I was stunned for a moment and guessed that something scary was happening to her. I was shocked and didn't know what to do when suddenly a voice that called my name startled me. It was Chan. I quickly pointed at the toilet and stammered to him that Kalim's girlfriend was there, her whole body covered in blood. Chan also glanced in surprise at the toilet, but he didn't see anything. After he said that, I glanced at the toilet again. It was true that there was no one inside. So how could the girl I just saw disappear so quickly? I was stunned and didn't know what to say, and Chan still purposefully went inside to see if anyone was there. I went in too, but there was no trace inside. Chan said, "Maybe because it was dark, you were looking at it wrong. Why was there anyone in here?" I got confused and looked at the place where Kalim's girlfriend was standing earlier. It couldn't be an illusion because I was mentally alert. There wasn't a drop of blood on the floor. I had to wonder if I was dazzled. When I was bewildered, Chan suddenly pushed me outside because he also wanted to go to the bathroom. I knew I was not dazzled, but I couldn't find a reasonable explanation for what just happened. After going to the bathroom, I went back to my room and thought for a while before going to sleep. But the following day, I was awakened by 10 screams. He seemed to be very angry with Kalim. I didn't know what happened, so I got dressed and went out to have a look. Outside, 10 angrily banged on the door and called Kalim several times. Even the others were there. I walked over to Chan's back and asked him what had happened. Seeing me, Chan immediately pointed to the ground and showed me the reason. Through the gap in the door, maggots crawled everywhere. Not only that, there was a liquid that looked and smelled extremely bad flowing on the ground. The maggots and the stench made me want to vomit on the spot. The stench was coming from Kalim's room. 10 banged on the door for a while. Kalim finally opened the door and asked what we were up to. 10 put his hand over his nose and angrily rushed in and pushed Kalim down. As soon as the door opened, we immediately saw Kalim's girlfriend sleeping on the bed. The strange thing was that her sleeping position was precisely the same as the one I saw a few days ago. Kalim didn't want us to invade his room, so he loudly kicked us out. 10 didn't care about his attitude. He thought Kalim was dirty and refused to dump garbage, but piled them up somewhere, causing the smelly situation. Chan was trying to search under the bed when he screamed in terror again. At that time, Kalim rushed to shield his girlfriend, the purpose of which was not for us to see. I and the others also went to Chan to see what the girl's face was like. It turns out that this Kalim guy was a pervert. He didn't have a girlfriend. It was just a sex doll. Kalim screamed and kicked everyone out for daring to invade his privacy. Then, because he couldn't find anything, 10 led us outside with a slightly mocking expression on Kalim's face. Just as I stepped closer to the wardrobe, the closed door suddenly popped open. Suddenly something fell towards me, startling me. No one would have thought that what had just fallen out of the closet was the corpse of a girl. How horrible! Because I didn't take precautions, I was knocked to the ground by the girl's heavy body. The girl's body was on top of me. Maggots, dirty water from her body splashed all over me. Her body was in the process of rotting and smelling. Her eyes were still wide open. It felt like she was staring at me. I was so scared that my soul flew away. I cried and screamed and pushed her body aside. Seeing me like this, Mr. Ten and Chan quickly pulled me up. At that time, Kalim wanted to run away but was caught by 10. Knowing that he had killed someone, we immediately called the police. Kalim killed his girlfriend when he heard that she wanted to break up. He purposely used a dummy to pretend to be his girlfriend to cover this up. After that story still haunted me, so I had to move to a new place. To this day, I still wondered, was the person I saw in the bathroom the ghost of Kalim's girlfriend? About 10 years ago, I went to a mountain village in the country as a trainee teacher after graduating from university. Although I had to go to a strange place, I was not alone because I also had a classmate with me. His name is Ben. The place we went to work was relatively backward. The school was a dilapidated 2-story house located on a mountain to the west of the village. Because the village was backward, living conditions were not good and there were no dormitories, so we lived in a free classroom on the first floor of the school. Since there was nothing to entertain us there, we usually went to bed very early. Every night, I took advantage of the bed sheets and blankets. The hardest part every night was that I had to go to the toilet before going to bed. After making the bed, I grabbed the flashlight and prepared to go out. At this time, my friend told me to be careful when walking because it was very dark around here. It was quite deserted around here, so I also felt a bit scared. I turned to ask Ben to go with me for fun, but Ben said that he was very sleepy. He also warned me one more thing, that in the village, it seemed that someone had just died. This thing scared me even more. It turned out that this guy was trying to scare me too. Ben told me that someone in this village was buried on the hill west of this school a few days ago. Hearing this, I didn't know why my friend was trying to scare me anymore. Regardless of what Ben said, I turned my head and took the flashlight to go outside. As soon as I went out, I saw that the surroundings were dark with no moonlight. Honestly, I was also a little worried. The toilet of the school was on the side of the road outside the school, nearly 100 meters from the school gate. There were no houses around the school, which was extremely deserted. But right now, in a hurry, I could only reassure myself and walk towards the gate. This place was different from the city. The night was extremely quiet. Not even a light was visible. I turned on my flashlight to find the way and finally reached the toilet. Although the toilets here were a bit run down and old-fashioned, it was always a great feeling to have the problem resolved promptly. After going to the toilet, when I stepped outside, I suddenly heard faint footsteps coming from somewhere. Hearing the movement, I thought Ben must have sneaked out quietly, hid outside the toilet and prepared to scare me. So I raised my voice, telling him that I had spotted him already. "You're gone, I've seen you!" But after I finished, something caught my attention. I immediately flashed my flashlight in the direction of the moving person. It was weird. 2 people showed up, so it was not Ben. I wondered why the 2 of them were walking at night at this time and they didn't even use flashlights. The strange thing was that the height of these 2 people in the dark was not like an adult, but like 2 12 or 13-year-old children. Suddenly they stopped and slowly turned back. I felt a little scared at the time. I gathered my courage and shone a flashlight at them. The scene that followed made me jump. I found the clothes of those 2 very strange. It was kind of red, blue and very bright. I thought that maybe it was the local costumes here. I was surprised and kept asking questions in my head. Only now did I notice half of their faces hidden in the shadows, especially the 2 red lips, which seemed very strange. And just a few seconds later, I was shocked by the terrifying scene before my eyes. The faces of these 2 suddenly became monstrous. They stared at me terribly. At this point they looked very lifeless. I realized that they were 2 paper people with eerie smiles on their gloomy faces. They were staring at me. Paper. Paper people. My mouth stammered. My face stiffened. I looked extremely panicked. Terrified, I slipped and fell, dropping both the flashlight and the toilet paper in my hand. The 2 paper people were still standing, smiling weirdly and getting uglier and uglier. That smile completely haunted me. I used all my strength and ran away for life. As I ran, I shouted that there was a ghost. After running for a while, I turned around to see if they were chasing me. Under the light of the flashlight, they were still standing motionless and looking in my direction. Their faces began to become more monstrous, their smiles downright terrifying. Hearing my screams from afar, Ben rushed to the door and asked me what was wrong. I rushed in and shouted that there were ghosts. "Oh no! Paper people!" When Ben heard me talk about the paper people, he was also amazed. Not letting him continue to ask me, I quickly pushed him into the room. Immediately after, I closed the door and locked it. After closing the door, my back was against the door, my feet fell to the ground, and I started to gasp. Ben reassured me to stay calm and tell him everything. "Ben, I saw 2 ghosts!" At first, Ben thought I was pretending, but after he noticed that my whole body was shaking and my face was pale, he finally realized that something was wrong. Then he squatted down and hurriedly reassured me. Paper people! I saw 2 paper people. I slowed my breathing a bit and talked about what just happened to Ben. After listening to me, Ben was silent for a moment, then helped me to the bed to rest. But lying in bed, I couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned all night. My mind was filled with the bizarre scene. The following morning, the sun rose and warm rays were shining through the window. I woke Ben up and went to report this to the village secretary. At our insistence, the village secretary would find us a house in the village too. Although the new accommodation was worse than the school accommodation, it was in the village anyway, and I felt safer. Only later did I learn that a couple had died in the village a few days ago. The night I saw the 2 paper people were just 7 days after their death. At the time of burial, the family burned down 2 paper dolls. But that night, I saw 2 paper people walking on the street. I have no idea what happened. That was also the question I still hadn't found the answer to. In 1991, it occurred in Sha Tin, Hong Kong. After graduating from secondary school, I didn't have a job and was just wandering around all day, so my father sent me to a distant relative's house to learn how to paint professionally. It was actually about making paper people, paper horses and paper structures. In a nutshell, it was a collection of paper objects used for burning. Because this was a profession associated with the dead, many people found it unappealing at first. I was no exception, but after more than a year of study, my perspective had shifted dramatically. First and foremost, this was a primary source of income for my family, with some colored paper and dried rice stalks that could be sold for money, and it was a highly skilled industry. And my master, I'm not sure what to say about him, but he was very well known within 10 miles and 8 villages nearby. He was a great teacher to me and taught me many things. My master and I moved a few large paper animals out of the house one morning in September to make room. My master was also very familiar with the funeral process, and he was frequently invited to perform funeral rites. But before he left, he told me that the finished paper people should never have their faces painted because the paper people would become spiritual. Drawing souls was the term used in the paper drawing industry to describe craftsmen who used color to draw the facial features of a person on the paper ones. I believed it was because he was afraid I would make an ugly face and waste my time, so I didn't care too much, and I was afraid the master would nag me, so I continued to work at home. The majority of people were afraid to enter the paper shop. Actually, after I got used to it, I preferred to be alone and work faster. I shaped the hot oil-soaked cornstarch into a man's skeleton, and it was quickly assembled. A palm tree leaf stalk soaked in hot oil was not only strong, but also difficult to break, making it very convenient and flexible. The wire connecting the paper body had to be made of caster fiber. These things hadn't been too sloppy under the master's supervision. The master frequently stated that in this profession, you shouldn't deceive people because there were ghosts. It was easy to deceive people, but it was not easy to deceive ghosts. These materials were typically prepared by the master himself, and all I could do was follow. In our industry, the paper used to be put on the frame was referred to as leather, which referred to the type of skin that was glued to the paper body. All good leather was made of dried straw. No glue was used in the manufacturing of plaster, which was made from flour and glutinous rice puree. The ratio of water to flour, as well as the temperature, were critical for ensuring flexibility. Although many people were no longer interested in this ancient craft, my master was always interested in it. Even though I could disagree with him, I still greatly respected him. After more than a year of study, I had mastered all of these things. It took me half a morning, and while I couldn't see the sophistication of the skeleton inside, the outer appearance was nearly identical to what the master would have done. I took out a pencil case from the drawer to color the paper man, and I wanted to draw him wearing clothes. I was facing the paper man at the time, but I suddenly felt eyes staring at me behind the desk. I looked back, and only the paper man was there. I discovered that the master's brush set was specially designed for drawing people and creating their souls on paper. At that precise moment, an idea occurred to me. The color of the sky outside was gradually darkening by this point. Master had yet to return. Perhaps he forgot about time because he had been invited to drink. But after a long struggle, I gave up the thoughts in my heart, not wanting to irritate my master. It was already 10 o'clock at night, and the master hadn't returned, and when I looked at the paper people in the room, I got a strange feeling in my heart. I had some issues like that. I couldn't forget an idea that had formed in my mind. I always wanted to do it. My master would never let me do this, so this was a good chance for me to show it off. So I began to draw souls for the paper people cautiously. Actually, I enjoyed writing and drawing, so I believed I could draw very well. It was just if the drawing was bad, the master would consider it a waste of time, so I was very careful. I finished my first paper man nervously, and it was a huge success. I became more daring and quickly drew the second paper person. The only thing I didn't understand was why there was so much red in the master's color box. When I finished, I looked at my masterpiece and saw that it was as good as the paper man made by the master. Speaking of the soulful paper man, I believed it was even more beautiful than his paper man. Everything had been cleaned up, but the master hadn't returned. He surely had been too drunk, so I went to bed first. At first, I couldn't sleep well because I was always worried about when the master would return to open the door for him. But my eyelids didn't listen to my body, and I fell asleep without realizing it when I lay down. Perhaps I had a good night's sleep as well, because I heard people walking around. The sound was very strange. It appeared that someone had walked around in front of the door, and the sound of paper rubbing could be heard from time to time. I sat up, and there was a noise on the bed, followed by a sound in front of the door. I thought, that's strange. Was that my fantasy? I checked the pendulum clock on the table. It was past 12 o'clock at night. I was afraid it was the teacher returning drunk and unsteadily, causing damage from outside, so I got up and went outside to see. But what struck me as odd was that there was no one outside, and I couldn't figure out where the voice was coming from. I opened the door once more and looked out into the courtyard to see if there was anything there. However, the yard was also empty. Master may have drank too much and slept in an acquaintance's house. He was unlikely to return tonight. It appeared that the sound I just heard was a dream, because I was dreaming at the time. However, the light in the room enabled me to see a black shadow rushing towards me, and behind me appeared a man holding a wooden stick. Before I could get a better look, a wooden stick smacked me across the head. I couldn't figure out what was going on because of the surprise attack. It was only then that I reluctantly pushed myself up, looking back to see who had hit me. But when I saw it clearly, it made my head spin. How could it do this? In front of me stood the paper man I just made today, a man made of paper with skeletons made of palm leaf stalks and straw paper. How was the paper man in front of me able to move? And he even wanted to kill me with that stick he was holding. I couldn't care less about it right now, so I backed away as quickly as I could, avoiding the club that kept swinging downwards. But at that precise moment my hand came into contact with something, a sickle used to cut rice. I desperately waved the sickle forward, cutting a long hole in the paperman's thigh. The paperman's movements came to a halt, but I was terrified on the inside, as if my masterpiece was being destroyed by myself. Those skeletons made of palm leaf stalks and parchment skins were entirely my own creation. I was in a state of shock at the time. I'm not sure where I got such ridiculous ideas. The man in front of me was about to suffocate me. While I was still dazed, the paperman suddenly rushed forwards towards me, perhaps because I drew too much. The paperman at the time appeared to be a real person, which was very strange. I immediately threw those ridiculous ideas out the window and continued to wave my sickle forward. Because the crescent was so sharp, I could see it had cut a few holes in the paperman's body. Despite the fact that all of the skin had been ripped and brushed, skeletons inside had been cut open. The paperman's movements continued. The paperman lunged in front of me in the blink of an eye, a large stick in his hand raised towards me. I was helpless to resist. All I could do was close my eyes and wait for the stick to fall. But at that moment I felt a light in front of me and heat spreading. When I opened my eyes, there was a burning paperman in front of me with a torch through its chest. There was a figure standing behind the blazing light and raging flames, holding a torch. When the master returned, he saw my situation and used torches to relieve my siege. When I saw my master return, I just wanted to tell him what had happened, but he abruptly stopped me when I said, "Teacher, just now it became completely real."
"Bring out all the paper people."
To avoid a disaster, the master directed that I immediately burn all of the paper people that I had made today. The fruits of my day's labor turned into a raging fire in the blink of an eye. But after witnessing the heinous appearance of the recently resurrected paperman, I felt compelled to burn it all down. The master asked why paper people had become real and why I had given them a soul. It turned out the story has a long history and many ancient secrets. This drawing soul is even a never-ending anecdote. If you draw the paperman too much like a human, he will have a soul. The paperman only needed bones, and their responsibility was to replace the souls of the dead, so the paperman couldn't have a soul. In the master's chalk box, there was a red color made of rooster blood powder mixed with cinnabar that could only be lit at the last moment when the paperman and paper horse were about to be burned. That was how it ended. I'm still learning craft techniques from the master. I'm still doing this job, but I have a lot of respect for the people who came before me.
I've seen a lot of strange things these days in this business, which was known as doing business with the living during the day and doing business with the dead at night.
This heartbreaking story took place in a small city in the north. The pitiful but also blameworthy person in this story was a boy named Beto. The boy's mother died early in an accident, so he lived with his father. At first, the father and son's life was very peaceful and happy, but a year later, his father married a new wife and his life also started to be sad from that point on. Since his stepmother moved in together, Beto was beaten and scolded by his father, even though his father had never done it before. On the contrary, Beto's father always loved his new wife very much. Sometimes later, Beto learned that his stepmother was pregnant. The quarrels between him and his father became more and more intense. In the eyes of Beto's father now, he was a rebellious and stubborn boy who was disruptive. In Beto's heart, there was only one mother. He did not accept and allow the stepmother to take the place of his mother. Time flew. The stepmother's belly was getting bigger and bigger. One day, after his father and stepmother went shopping together for the baby, they also bought Beto a clothed doll. Beto saw the gift, but he did not feel happy. On the contrary, he became angrier because he thought his stepmother was deliberately humiliating him, assuming that he had the same hobbies as girls. Afraid of affecting the fetus and affecting his wife, Beto's father silently threatened to force him to learn to be obedient if Beto did not want his pocket money to be cut. Because Beto didn't want to be with his stepmother, he made excuses to eat outside every day. Without pocket money, he wouldn't be able to live. Beto reluctantly accepted the doll and sadly went back to his room. He couldn't hide his anger, so he slammed the door in front of his father and stepmother. Outside, the father and stepmother were also tired of Beto's ignorant and disrespectful behavior. After entering the room, Beto directly threw the doll on the ground and cried silently on the bed. At this time, he felt very lonely and sad. Beto cried out alone for an hour and fell asleep because he was tired. The following morning, when Beto woke up, he saw the doll sitting on the ground. The more he looked at it, the more sulky Beto felt. He angrily picked up the doll and was about to throw it out. As soon as he went to the door, Beto saw his stepmother going somewhere. The hatred in the boy's heart began to rise. Beto suddenly had an idea and threw the doll towards his stepmother. He immediately called his stepmother and asked her to help pick up the doll. The stepmother turned her head when she heard Beto's voice and couldn't help but be surprised to see that the doll she gave Beto yesterday was lying at her feet. Seeing that his stepmother didn't say anything nor react, Beto pretended to care about his stepmother and said he would pick it up himself. Seeing that, the stepmother thought that Beto had accepted her, so she was happy and wanted to pick up the doll for him. After saying that, she slowly bent down to pick up the doll. Beto also took the opportunity to sneak around behind his stepmother's back. Then Beto quickly pushed the stepmother's back with his hand. Due to loss of balance, the stepmother fell forward. Because her belly was too big, it hit the ground hard. The stepmother began to feel severe abdominal pain then fainted from loss of blood. At this point, under her body was all blood, and the baby in her belly was dead. The blood flowed out in a stream and stuck to the doll next to it. Beto looked at his stepmother lying on the ground, a satisfied smile on the corner of his mouth. At that time, the boy felt happy that no one could take his father anymore. Beto hurriedly picked up the doll and hurriedly left. Then he threw the doll in the corner of the room where no one else could find it. Next, he pretended to be the first person to spot the injured person and called for an ambulance. After taking the stepmother to the hospital, Beto became a hero, because the doctors all said that if it came a little later, the mother's life could not be saved. Although the fetus died, Beto's stepmother was fine. Beto's father immediately wanted to buy some food to nourish his wife. He also told Beto to take care of his stepmother. Beto's father didn't wait for him to answer, then hurriedly left, leaving Beto alone in the emergency room. Beto looked at the shadow of his father was far away. Suddenly, he felt extremely scared. He was worried that if his stepmother woke up, the truth would be surely exposed. Beto went inside and took a sneak peek. At this time, the stepmother woke up and couldn't help but mourn for the dead baby. Beto saw the fruit knife next to him. He suddenly had a desire to kill, because he was afraid that his father would kill him if he knew everything. Without thinking too much, Beto made up his mind. He took the fruit knife and went to his stepmother's bed. When she heard footsteps, the stepmother looked up and broke down in tears when she saw Beto holding the knife. Beto walked to the bed, only called his stepmother's name once, and suddenly smiled a ghostly smile. That smile scared the stepmother. She knew the one pushing her was Beto. She didn't expect Beto to be so scary. In this situation, Beto was also extremely worried and hesitant about whether to stab his stepmother to death or not. Although she hated Beto very much, the child in her stomach was also lost. The stepmother said she did not intend to denounce Beto and promised to tell everyone she accidentally fell. Just when Beto hesitated and his stepmother was scared, his father suddenly shouted from behind. Beto turned his head in surprise, knowing that he had been discovered. Beto pretended to say that he just wanted to peel apples for his stepmother to eat. However, Beto's father could not believe his explanation because there were no fruits in the room. The father ordered Beto to give him the knife immediately. Holding the knife behind him, Beto tried to cut his hand with the knife. Seeing the blood dripping, Beto's stepmother understood what he meant. She did not want to break the relationship between father and son, so she explained that she wanted to eat apples, but later realized there were no apples in the room. Beto's father immediately believed his wife and said nothing more, gently telling Beto to return home first. Beto rushed home because he didn't dare and didn't want to stay in the hospital anymore. After Beto left, the stepmother hugged Beto's father to relieve the pain in her heart. She also did not tell Beto's crimes to his father. At home, Beto also felt tormented and scared. He was afraid of his stepmother telling the truth and afraid of being sent to a reformatory for criminal children. But after that, everything was fine. A month later, Beto's stepmother was discharged from the hospital, but they did not return home. Later, Beto learned that his father and stepmother had bought another house and started a new life without him. Beto's father would transfer money to him once a month. All Beto's living expenses were covered by his father. When he saw his father leave, Beto was heartbroken. Now Beto felt that the world no longer loved him. Over time, Beto began to live alone. One day, after returning from school, Beto saw the doll he had thrown away lying at the door. The doll still had blood on it, and Beto immediately thought that maybe it was his stepmother who brought it to scare him. Beto didn't even look at the doll. He kicked it away and went into the house. Late at night, when Beto went to sleep, he had a strange dream. In the dream, Beto was chased by a child. The child kept asking Beto to play with him, making Beto extremely scared. Although he could not see the child talking, Beto could completely hear its voice coming from his brain. Chased by the child, Beto risked his life to run forward despite the endless space ahead. While Beto was deep asleep, the doll he kicked in the afternoon suddenly entered the room and stood staring at him in the dark. The doll then jumped onto Beto's face, covering his nose, mouth, and using its weight causing him to suffocate. 2 days later, Beto's father tried to call home several times, but he didn't receive a reply. His father decided to go back home to check it out, and he found out Beto was dead. Beto's eyes, nose, and mouth were all covered with cotton wool. Beto's corpse was so scary that it haunted his father for a long time. Beto's father called the police soon after, and after the police investigated, they did not find any trace of the perpetrator. Therefore, the case was still unfinished. Everyone then focused on Beto's corpse, but no one noticed that in the corner of the room, there was an abandoned doll. It showed a very strange smile. It had a face like a baby and was crying silently. No one knew that inside the doll lived another world, and Beto's soul had been trapped there. Time later, Beto's death still torments Beto's father and stepmother. They only blame themselves for the carelessness that caused the death of their poor son. The story I wanted to tell you this time was about my neighbor. His name was Lu Fang. However, we usually didn't get along well with him. One day, while my friend and I were walking on the street, my friend told me that Lu Fang was following us. I told him to ignore him and urged him to go faster. But we couldn't stand the smell of Lu Fang. No one wanted to play with him. Lu Fang's family condition was not very good. He looked a bit malnourished and his clothes were also very shabby. Although Lu Fang's house was next to mine, I didn't make friends with him for this reason. Lu Fang's house was full of paper people and paper horses all over the house. It looked so weird. In front of Lu Fang's house there was also a round wreath of flowers to invite business. It was not just Lu Fang who looked annoyed but also his mother. In the countryside at that time, almost every family kept a few chickens and pigs, and sometimes they could not avoid diseases and they would die. When pets die of disease, people often throw them in the river. When Lu Fang's mother saw someone dump an animal carcass, she would bring it home to clean it and eat it. We all guessed Lu Fang's strange body odor because of eating too many sick animals. His mother also rarely interacted with people in the village. She had a very odd temperament, so the family's paper business was not doing very well. Every time we see Lu Fang's mother, we shied away and couldn't figure out why we were so afraid of her. Once, I was walking home alone and passed in front of Lu Fang's house. I heard a commotion in his yard. If it was someone else's house, I might not care, but Lu Fang's house was different because I had never seen anyone visit his house. The noise from his yard intrigued me. I listened and wanted to go in and see. I tiptoed to Lu Fang's front door, put my ear to the door and listened to the movement in the courtyard. Beside Lu Fang's voice, I heard the voice of a girl in the yard. This thing piqued my curiosity even more. I mustered up my courage and was about to push the door open to see who was inside. I gently pushed open the door to reveal an opening and peered into the courtyard. I guessed it could be a sneaking relationship. I could feel my heart beating faster. Since the opening was not too big, I could only see a part of the courtyard. I saw Lu Fang playing ball with that girl very happily. I'd rarely seen him smile so happily before. But no matter how I changed my perspective, I couldn't see the girl. The less I saw, the more worried I was because I didn't know if something shady happened here. As I was looking at the yard with my full attention, a hand suddenly was placed on my shoulder. The sudden hand almost scared the hell out of me. It was Lu Fang's mother. She yelled at me with fierce eyes and asked what I was doing in front of her house. I was so scared. Lu Fang's mother's screams made me tremble so much that my legs went limp. I sat down on the ground. Lu Fang's mother asked if I wanted to steal something from her house. She thought I was stealing things from her house, while Lu Fang's house was poor. There was nothing worth stealing. The moment she didn't notice, I immediately escaped. As I ran, I screamed in terror at what had just happened before my eyes. It was horrible. That night, I dreamt that Lu Fang's mother was chasing me. The next day after school, I told my friend about it. He laughed at me for being shy. I didn't want to let the story go. I asked my friend that night we would go to Lu Fang's house together to see which girl was playing with him. I didn't wait for my friend to agree or disagree, but I decided on this. I returned home to eat a hasty dinner, then ran to Lu Fang's door. I hid in the corner and stared at his house. My friend also came soon after. During the 2 hours we watched, no one entered Lu Fang's house. But when I was talking to my friend, there was a noise in Lu Fang's yard. I asked my friend if he could hear a girl's voice in the yard. My friend also listened carefully. In the yard, a girl was playing with Lu Fang. The two of them seemed to have had a lot of fun playing together. Their laughter seemed to tear the cold air. My friend suggested going inside to see who the girl was in the yard, but I disagreed. I was still afraid of being discovered by Lu Fang's fierce mother like yesterday. We hid in the corner and looked in. When it got dark, my friend got bored and wanted to leave. I stopped him. I waited patiently for a while and then I heard the sound of clack, 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 clack. Someone was opening the door. I saw a girl with a red face walking out of Lu Fang's house. We didn't know if the girl was from this village or not, because she looked strange. At first, I thought someone was visiting Lu Fang. Because we wanted to know what had happened, we followed her and tried to see who she would meet. My friend and I followed her out of the village when it was dark. The friend was a bit scared, so he didn't want to follow anymore and wanted to go home. I ignored him and continued to follow the girl. I knew it was getting dark and it was dangerous to go back to the village. He didn't dare to go back alone, so he could only go on with me. I also convinced him and we talked. He pointed forward and said that the girl had gone into the forest. I saw that the girl had left the road and entered a forest on the side of the road. My friend and I ran into the forest as fast as we could for fear of losing track of that girl. Because if we lost track, it seemed like we wasted all night. But when we ran into the forest, the girl was gone. While I was about to find her, I suddenly panicked at the scene before me. I was so scared that I stepped back and bumped into my friend. He was also taken aback by my actions, his voice trembling as he asked me what was wrong. At that time, we also discovered that we were chasing the girl to the cemetery. My friend burst into tears and wanted to go home immediately. I felt awe at the scene in front of me too. Just as we were about to turn around and wanted to run back, we bumped into something behind us and made a noise. In the dark and silent graveyard, the sound almost made me pee my pants. This sight made my legs weak. I didn't know when a paperman figure was placed behind us. A paperman was standing in front of us. We reassured ourselves by assuming that the wind had blown this paperman here. My friend was so scared that he cried and turned to run home. I didn't dare to stay alone, so I followed him out of the cemetery. As I ran out of the graveyard, I looked at the paperman again.
This paper person looked very similar to the girl who walked out of Lu Fang's house. After many times of fear, I did not dare to continue to find out who was playing with Lu Fang. Every time I passed his house, I could still hear the noise in the yard. I didn't have the guts to find it anymore. This occurred in 2001. At the time, I was working as a security guard at an aging business mall. The mall had 4 levels in total, and we only had 2 employees working the night shift. Because I was new and unfamiliar with the area, the captain requested Higo to accompany me. Higo had been working in the company for 4 years and was quite relaxed and pleasant to work with. It was still early to be on duty, so Higo and I played cards and chat for a while. According to Higo, this mall was set to shut due to poor business. The task here was simple. There were 4 levels, but I just needed to examine the 3 below. There was no need to check the 4th. When I heard it, I was intrigued and wanted to ask him why I couldn't get to the 4th level. Was there something forbidden up there? Higo saw my curiosity and placed a card on the table, told me a story about the 4th floor of the mall. He claimed that 3 years ago, this location had a security guard called Sun, a new employee looking for a position. That day, he was on duty at night. There were 2 people on duty at the time, so one volunteered for patrolling the 1st and 2nd floor to save time. Sun was in charge of the 3rd and 4th. Called it patrolling, but in fact, they just had to walk around. They were primarily fashion and souvenir booths. Sun was ready to walk downstairs after patrolling the 4th floor when he heard the laugh of a woman behind him. The unexpected laugh scared him to death in the middle of the night, and he swiftly turned around to inquire, then proceeded to the entrance of the corridor to verify. The weird thing was that the corridor was completely empty, with not a single person in sight. Sun walked from one end to the other, but seeing no one made him feel odd. There was no way he could have misheard anything. He paused in front of a closed-door window, and at that moment Sun felt a chill down his spine, as if there was something near that he couldn't quite put his finger on. He was ready to head downstairs when he heard more eerie laughter behind him. Sun abruptly shifted his gaze, too terrified by the scene in front of him. Sun observed something scary. He saw the mannequins in the shop behind him, gazing at him with pale eyes, grotesque features, followed by demonic laughter. Sun was so terrified that he recoiled. After a long time, he stood up and hurried downstairs. Higo claimed that Sun panicked that night and was already frightened, and that he was eventually dismissed by the firm. What Higo said was extremely frightening, and I wasn't sure if he was attempting to scare me or not. But Higo was dead serious and didn't appear to be kidding. After finishing the story, he said he went to his checkpoint. I followed Higo out of the security room. He assigned me to patrol the 1st and 2nd floor while he walked up to the 3rd floor personally. The mall would shut down the escalator at night and would have to rely on an outdated elevator to go up and down. Higo stepped into the elevator and instructed me to contact him on the walkie-talkie if anything went wrong. I began patrolling the 1st level by myself, and I was still terrified of what Higo mentioned earlier. In 3 steps, I virtually completed examining the 1st floor. Then I reboarded the elevator for the 2nd floor.
I pressed the button and the old elevator began to groan and rise. As predicted, this retail complex was in disrepair. Just then, something unusual happened that gave me shivers. The elevator didn't stop when it reached the second floor, but instead went higher. It continued till it reached the fourth floor before coming to a halt. This terrified me. I felt nervous of something that I couldn't name. And as the elevator door creaked open, I didn't dare to take a deep breath. Thankfully, there was nothing outside the door. I immediately hit the button to lock the elevator door down to the second floor. The outdoor space was extremely dark, which made me impossible to calm down. But the buttons didn't work, and the elevator door wouldn't close either. And I had a feeling that if I didn't get out of here quickly, there would be horrible creatures coming after me. At that time, I remembered the walkie-talkie, so I grabbed it and dialed Higo. But the radio couldn't connect to Higo and instead created a rustling sound that sounded like interference. I dialed it 3 times in a row. I couldn't stay in the elevator any longer. Perhaps it had actually broken, so I walked out. As soon as I entered the 4th floor corridor, just as Higo said, there were windows on both sides with many mannequins inside. I lowered my head to try to walk straight and told myself not to look at them. But my curiosity compelled me to lift my eyes to examine. And it was terrifying because these mannequins had monstrous features and were staring at me. I proceeded to the end of the corridor where there was an anti-theft door and took a slow, deep breath to calm myself down. The escalator was directly in front of me, and it was probably my only way out right now, so I kept walking with my instincts attempting to shine the torch forward.
Suddenly, I spotted the door, perhaps an exit, but when I pushed the doorknob, it was closed.
At this moment, the door was jammed, making me even more terrified. I tried my hardest to open it. I grasped the door handle with both hands and pulled it back as if something was held behind. But then the door slammed open unexpectedly. Not only that, but the objects within truly terrified me. There were a number of odd individuals tumbling towards me. I gazed at them in disbelief. These guys had horrible features and no limbs. I couldn't get away, and I was crushed down. They appeared to be damaged mannequins that had been packed inside the warehouse. These were the types of models found in clothes retailers. They all stared at me with glassy eyes and hideous faces. That sensation terrified me. I was so scared and took a step back. Those mannequins were scattered on the floor. Their gazes were still fixed on me. They all kept staring at me like that.
What are you up to?
Higo's voice suddenly came from behind. He returned to the security room after patrolling the 3rd floor and didn't see me. He heard my scream on the 4th floor, so he came up here to check. I was in panic while informing Higo that these mannequins looked like devils. He kicked at the mannequins laying below. Then he looked up at the mannequin's head. He looked at it and said, they were normal. Perhaps it was because I was afraid of the other tail, so I looked at it incorrectly. What was unusual was that once Higo arrived, those mannequins went back to being normal, simply a collection of damaged clothing mannequins. So Higo threw them into the dustbin. Higo and I returned to the security room. I still had the impression that those mannequins were staring at me after I had gone a few feet. I worked in the mall for 2 months before it closed. I was also not paid. Just that bizarre experience that I would remember for the rest of my life.